Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And I'm Randy Fischer.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys, wishing you a happy 4th of July.
Yes, sir.
Amen. Oh,
Happy
very
birthday,
special day.
America.
Happy birthday, America. I got to do the math in the head and see which birthday this is. It's been a while. What, 200 and... I'm not even going to try it because
Too much math.
I'll get it wrong for sure. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we could give the fair tax would be America's on our next birthday that the people's present to America would be the fair tax?
That would be wonderful. That would be a time to celebrate and a time to do more than just have a cookout and watch some fireworks up in the evenings.
A gift for the ages.
A gift for the age, a gift for our children, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren.
So, the 4th of July, I tell you what, one of my favorite holidays, no doubt about it. All patriotic Americans should be celebrating today. The United States of America is still the only nation in the entire recorded history of the world that was founded on the principles of freedom and individual equality that like America was, and there has never been another nation like us and probably never will be another one.
We have the greatest Constitution that has ever been drafted by the hand of man, and we have the Bill of Rights, which is the preservation of those natural rights which are granted to us by the Creator. And it's more than just going out and having a cookout and watching some fireworks. It's a time to honor the military, the men and women who have made us free and kept us free. It's a time to remember why the founders put their lives and their property and their sacred honor on the line in order to take on the largest military in the world at that time with a small band of grassroots followers, something like the grassroots followers that we are here at the FAIRtax.
All right. Let me remind everybody again of our email address, thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. The FAIRtax Guys, all one word, at gmail.com if you've got a question or a comment for us. And we've gotten lots of good ideas and feedback from folks whose ideas have made their way onto FAIRtax Power Radio. So we would love to hear from you at thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. Like us on our Facebook page as well. And I'll tell you what, Randy, you mentioned in the Bill of Rights.
Yes, sir.
It galls my gizzard no end to know how badly the income tax just tramples all over that Bill of Rights. And that's what we're going to talk about today on FAIRtax Power Radio.
And it's almost like they designed the income tax system, and especially the Internal Revenue Service, as a way to slowly chip away and not so slowly blast away the rights which our founders fought and died for. And what I'd like to do, go ahead, Ron.
One of the problems we have is that people have gotten used to this. Americans have gotten used to this. They've gotten used to the IRS trampling on the Bill of Rights. And we have to shake them out of that, all right? We have to shake them out of that. And our gift to America is the fair tax. And as we'll explain, all right, this is going to resurrect, you might say, the Bill of Rights. Well, let's continue with that, and we'll talk about them one by one.
All right, again.
Oh, yeah.
The income tax, all messed up, no, rhyme or reason or order to that at all. The flat tax has a little bit more rhyme and reason and order to it, but it has the potential to become just as nasty as this one. And the fair tax is this little thing. Which one would you rather work with? I'd rather work with that one.
Pretty simple choice.
Amen. All right, let's get into it now. We've got an article here. Let's see, where did this come from, Randy?
Yeah, and I really like giving attribution to authors of articles. I don't want to ever get in a position of having people think that I created something when I didn't. So this is an article written by Chris Edwards. It first appeared on the Daily Caller, which is an online site, and it was reprinted by the Cato Institute, I believe, April 11th of 2014.
It's about 4 years old.
And this was at a time when there was a lot of scandal in the news about the Internal Revenue Service. I'm sure folks remember the name Lois Lerner.
Really? There's scandal at the Internal Revenue Service? Who'd have thunk it? Wow.
There was almost constant... There was destruction of evidence, elimination of email systems and emails, and BlackBerries were getting destroyed and turned in. And a lady by the name of Lois Lerner had the gall to come before a committee of Congress and actually assert a right that technically she could not assert if she were appearing before the Internal Revenue Service in the audit of her tax returns. She had the gall to sit down before a congressional committee and say, I've done nothing wrong, but I'm going to invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege and my right against self-incrimination and no longer answer any further inquiries that you might ask me, congressional committee.
Try doing that to an IRS auditor and see how far you get.
The point is, Congress will honor that. The IRS will not.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to do is go through the article, and the article actually has 10 points on which our constitutional rights have been degraded, chipped away, and in parts obliterated by the income tax system.
And you mentioned that forced self-incrimination.
Absolutely, and that's number 10 on the list, but number 1 in my heart. And that is, we all have a right not to be forced to testify in a criminal proceeding where we've been charged with a crime that may involve incarceration, except if we've been charged with a crime against the tax code, and one that's being investigated and adjudicated by the Internal Revenue Service. Because we have a requirement by statute under the Internal Revenue Act that we have to file a tax return under penalty of perjury. And as soon as we file that tax return under the penalty of perjury, they have a right, they essentially invalidate our Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination. You can't walk into a tax audit and invoke the Fifth Amendment and say, I'm simply not answering any questions, and expect to walk out unscathed.
Yeah, if Al Capone could have done that, he'd have stayed out of jail.
Al Capone would have, if he had had better lawyers, and I'm a lawyer myself and not practicing, so keep in mind, I'm not giving anybody legal advice here, and I'm not insured, so don't sue me. But if Al Capone had had better lawyers and had realized that he might have been able to invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege, and the worst they could do to him is make him pay some penalties, he might not have ended up in jail.
He ended up in Alcatraz.
Absolutely. Well, the second item is one of the ones that took the Founding Fathers and to war, and that is the right not to be subject to unreasonable searches and seizures without a warrant and without due process. Because what was happening in 1775, 1776 is that the British were coming in and seizing books and records and papers from their subjects because they were not yet citizens, and in using those documents to incriminate and prosecute and convict their subjects. So we built in a search and seizure provision into the Bill of Rights. And that's the number 9 on the list here. But again, it's very important. Keep in mind that in this electronic age, that includes the Internal Revenue Service's ability to get from Google, if you have a Gmail account, and this is an example, to get your emails. And they can go to Apple, and they may be able to access some of your text messages.
Wow.
Not from Apple. They would access them from your cellular service provider. And these searches and seizures can go on without warrant and without notice to you of the fact that these searches and seizures are going on.
Randy?
Yeah, several civil asset forfeiture cases that just make your blood boil.
Absolutely.
There you go. Yep, that's what I was going to mention, the civil asset forfeiture. Bob and I have talked about that on several occasions, and that's a perfect example. The IRS, say you're running a convenience store, you make a lot of cash deposits. There is a law that says if you deposit or move over $10,000, you have to report it to the IRS. And if you're trying to avoid that $10,000 by depositing smaller amounts, that's called structuring. That's also illegal. But the IRS has it set up with bank tellers that if the bank teller suspects something, he or she doesn't have to tell other tellers, their bosses or anything. They just report it to the IRS and boom, the IRS comes and seizes your bank account without accusing you, without convicting you of anything. So you're trying to run a store and your money is frozen.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's an unreasonable seizure if there ever was one.
And just in case anybody's wondering what section they would have to look for to find this authority for the IRS in the Internal Revenue Act, and it would be Tax Code Section 7602, and it allows them to obtain any record of any description from any person without probable cause and without a court order. And that's just something that should keep you awake at night. The next civil right that we lose under the Internal Revenue Act is the right to trial by jury. And it was very important to the founders and the framers of the Constitution that citizens not be tried just by a judge if they were going to be incarcerated unless they elected to do so. So in virtually every jurisdiction, for certainly a felony and a criminal and capital cases, you have a right to be tried by a jury of your peers. And under the Internal Revenue Act, you lose that right. This is the Sixth and Seventh Amendments that guarantee trial by jury, but the Internal Revenue Act comes in and sidesteps those constitutional rights. If you want to contest an IRS tax calculation prior to the time that it's assessed against you, you have to file a petition in the tax court. This is an administrative court, and it's not a what's called an Article 3 court, and your right to trial by jury goes out the window. You're actually tried by the same people who have investigated you and charged you. You're tried by the people that are...
So the prosecutor is also the judge and the jury.
Absolutely.
But there is no jury.
And
it's the judge.
They're the judge. And the judge's word is final. And before you can even appeal that, you have to pay the tax, the penalties, and the interest in full before you can bring an appeal on that.
Why do we, the people, put up with that?
Randy, let me add to that, too. If you have the wherewithal to take the IRS to court, let's say you do, and you've got some great attorneys, and you win, all right? Who pays the IRS's court fees?
We, the taxpayers, pay the IRS's court fees and the taxpayers' court fees, I believe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it just basically adds one more layer of embedded costs and taxes right out there on top of everything else that we're paying. This is an expensive system, too. It's not cheap. This tax court has a lot of clerks. It has a lot of lawyers. It has a lot of complexity, and it generates a lot of paper.
How long does it take to get a case heard?
You know, I've never checked, but I would say probably a minimum of 4 years.
Wow.
It could be quicker than that now. I've tried to stay as far away from it as possible.
Don't blame you.
That would be a good question for our president, Steve Hayes. He is a reformed tax attorney, and I know he litigated cases before the tax court. Well, let's go to the next item on the list here, and it's called the burden of proof. Under the Constitution and under the Bill of Rights, the burden to prove that you violated the law, that you committed the act, is on the state.
Is on them. You get the presumption of innocence.
You have the presumption of innocence and the state's burden is to prove that you committed the act, violated the law to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. And anytime anybody goes and sits on a jury, they're always asked, if it's a civil case like the kind I used to try, they're always asked, do you understand that the burden of proof in a criminal case is beyond the exclusion of any reasonable doubt? You literally tear the corner off a piece of paper, and that if that creates reasonable doubt, you cannot convict somebody. But in a civil case, and these tax court cases are more like civil cases, the burden of proof is on you as the proponent trying to undo whatever it is that IRS did to you.
So I think I'm the court, and I say, I think you've done something wrong. Prove me wrong.
That's it. You've been charged.
That ain't right, folks.
You've been charged, and you have a presumption that you did something wrong, and it's your burden to prove.
You're presumed guilty rather than presumed innocent under these things.
Yeah. You are presumed guilty by the people who are going to make the decision on whether you are or are not guilty.
Are you getting this, folks? We, the people, are putting up with this. We need to get rid of the whole system.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let me add one thing before we continue, folks. Right now, if you're listening to this, if you're not really angry about this, about what the IRS is doing, and the IRS is allowed to do this by Congress, if you're not really angry, you need to check your pulse and make sure you're still alive, because this really should anger you.
And you need to be thinking at the same time, what would life be like under the fair tax?
Yeah. Don't need any tax courts because there's no tax disputes.
Don't need an IRS because our retailers...
You pay the tax at the retail cash register when you buy something, end of story. And under the fair tax, all enforcement and monitoring and enforcement is at the vendor level, not at the individual level.
Right.
They're going to look at Walmart to make sure that they're collecting the tax and sending it back. They are not looking at all of the millions of people who buy things at Walmart.
Yeah.
Now, the only obligation of the individual taxpayer under the fair tax is to get the receipt that the retailer is required to provide them, showing that they paid the fair tax. And once they have that receipt they've completed their obligation. They are not going to be audited. Now, the retailers may be audited by the state sales
fair
tax
tax,
agency.
you cannot have an individual audit because they don't know who the individuals are.
Right. The only thing that would be audited would be the collections by the retailer.
Yeah, and the retailer actually gets to, under the fair tax, the retailer actually gets to keep a little bit. They are reimbursed a bit for their trouble in doing that. So why would they avoid doing something that's going to get them paid?
Right.
No sense.
Now, one more feature of the Fifth Amendment that I'd like to talk about, and that's the denial of due process under the Income Tax Code. We've already said a little bit about when it comes to search and seizure, that normally you would have a right of due process and notice under most circumstances before a search and seizure of your goods and papers is conducted. But you also have a right of due process under the law for all criminal charges, excluding those arising under the Internal Revenue Code. Under that code, you really don't have to be provided with counsel as you would under the criminal code. You wouldn't have to be notified necessarily by a certain date in advance of the fact that you have a hearing coming up or that you have deadlines that have to be met. The Internal Revenue Service does not have any requirements to meet those types of due process requirements, and you can easily make a misstep under the code and lose any right to due process. The next right that you have that's gone under the tax code as we have it today is a privacy right. Mm-hmm. And now, while there's not a specific constitutional amendment on privacy, it's certainly been interpreted into the law.
Yeah, the IRS makes you share more intimate details of your personal finances than you're comfortable telling your kids.
Mortgage records,
that's insane. Credit
card data, bank records,
how much
medical
you give your
records,
church?
Medical expenses, tuition data, They have the power to force you to disclose virtually every aspect of your financial and personal life.
That's wrong.
And that just opens the door for theft of your personal private information.
We've talked about ID theft here under the income tax here on Fair Tax Power Radio a good bit.
Thank you. ID theft. And that's just rampant. And a lot of that is because your Social Security number is tied to a lot of these accounts, and you have to file all this information in order to comply with the tax returns, in order to pick up those few scraps of exemptions, exclusions, and deductions that you might be entitled to. Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk a little bit about how you're supposed to be treated equally under the law. There's one thing that you're supposed to have as a citizen, and that is equality under the law. And the Internal Revenue Code obliterates that, because you've got people with similar incomes who are treated differently based upon exemptions, deductions, and credits. Yes. The difference between a homeowner and a renter is a good example. Mm-hmm. A homeowner comes in and is treated with the same exact amount of income that they have. They're treated differently than a renter because they have the mortgage interest deduction, which may completely change their net tax as compared to the renter who doesn't have that mortgage interest deduction. So there's a lack of what's called horizontal equality. People with similar incomes treated differently by the tax code.
Yeah, that's your dental school faculty versus your. Oh, we're back to that again. Go to Congress.gov and look that up. It's insane.
Yes, a specific carve out for dental school faculty, and there's not just one of those. There are tens of thousands of those under this tax code. Then you have what's called vertical inequality. And that comes along because you've got people who are treated very differently based upon their own means and circumstances. Mm-hmm. It's almost impossible for somebody that's making $40,000 or $50,000 a year to challenge a ruling by the Internal Revenue Service. But if somebody's got 10 million or 100 million, they've got the means to challenge that, and a lot of times when they're challenged, the Internal Revenue Service just walks away. They just give up.
Yeah, well, they go after the folks who do not have the means to fight them.
That's exactly it.
We've documented that here on FTPR as well.
And that's this vertical inequality. The people up here, they have the ability to fight and win. The people down here can't fight and they can't win.
Yes, I think that's these two little pieces of the income tax code right here. So.
Hey, I've got a quote here from James Madison that really seems appropriate. He was our fourth president. It will be of little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood. He didn't, in his time, there was no income tax. But that quote is absolutely appropriate to this tax code. And as far as
that really just kind of wraps it all together, because the major areas that we lose our civil rights in are the fact that we are dealing with a tax code that is so complex and so ambiguous that if you took 5 tax preparers, gave them all the same information, you're likely to get 5 different results.
Money Magazine did that, gave it to 50 different tax preparers and got 49 different answers.
Right.
Yeah.
That's been done. We got about 5 minutes left here. We need to scoot on.
Absolutely. Well, it's this size and instability. A citizen should be able to understand the law that they're being charged with, complying with. And when you get to a tax code that's 3,600 pages, that has another 71,000 plus pages of interpretations and regulations, then there's no way that you as a citizen can know what it is that you have to comply with. And the fact that it's just so unstable, as you guys have pointed out, every month you've got a new bill and another proposed bill and another proposed bill, and the bits and pieces as they get passed and amended, there's probably not more than a handful of people out there that really follow this close enough to know what it is that we have to comply with.
Oh, yes. I like President Jimmy Carter's description of the tax system, a disgrace to the human race. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but I'll buy that from him, no doubt.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the fact is that passing H.R. 25 and S-18 in the Senate at 131 pages.
That's the fair tax.
That's the fair tax. It wipes out 3,300 pages of the Internal Revenue Act of 1986 as amended. It wipes out all of those Code of Federal Regulations that are based on that tax code, and it wipes out all of those tax court cases that have accumulated over the past decades interpreting that tax code, and it leaves in its place 131 pages, simple, visible, efficient, and there will be some rules and regulations written for the fair tax, and there's some research out there that shows it would probably take about 350 pages of rules and regulations so that retailers know what to do with their existing inventory, and there's going to be, some transition, and you're still going to end up at about 600 pages compared to 74,600 pages.
Well, we didn't mean to mess up your 4th of July holiday. But if you're not mad about the income tax code and what it has done, the way it tramples on the Constitution, the way it shreds the Bill of Rights, if you're not mad about that after today, well, you ought to be.
I've got a quote here by Sam Adams here that, how are we going to get this done? I mean, somebody might be typing in, how are we going to get this done? And according to Sam Adams, all right, over 200 years ago, it does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. That's what we got to do, folks. We can, and the volunteers, the few volunteers that are across the country in the national group and all the state groups, we can't do it without your help. All right.
You ought to bring a blowtorch instead of a Rubik's Cube next week.
Yeah.
Hey, we got about 2 minutes left, Ron. You want to touch on the logo store again?
The FAIRtax logo store, you can go to fairtaxlogostore.org, and you can from there you can purchase hats, shirts, coffee mugs, pens. There's our little flashy thing here. All right,
Officer.
The pull-out banners are my favorites, and I should have brought mine with me.
Banners, what a great idea! You can go to a town hall and have your scrolling banner. I'm so angry at myself for not bringing one with me. That's the one prop I forgot to bring. But anyways, we need your help, folks, and that's a way to do it. We're calling it the FAIRtax Promotional Closet, but the website is fairtaxlogostore.org. So get involved.
Well, I think next week that the folks at Big Daddy Studios here will let you back in the studio if you will come back.
I appreciate
You can make it back from New York. Randy, thank you so much for filling in here for the past couple of episodes while Ron has been on the shelf here. But we do want to thank everyone for watching FAIRtax Power Radio. Share the videos. Tell your family and friends all about it. And until we meet again, I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Molero.
And I'm Randy Fischer.
The FAIRtax Guys reminding you once again that the fair tax is America's big solution. And once you understand it,
you will demand it.
Amen, brother. Go.
FAIRtax is coming to clean up this mess. We got to get rid of the IRS. Hey, hey!
Oh, these income tax forms are way too complicated. There's got to be a better way. Who are you?
We're the FAIRtax Guys.
We've got a big solution for you.
What's that?
It's the fair tax. Completely eliminates the federal income tax system as we know it. No more withholding, no more payroll taxes, no more tax returns ever, no more IRS. All gone. And I guarantee you, once you understand it,
You'll demand it.
Yeah.
This mess.